Were you surprised with the ease that Hua got the job done and how devastating it was?
It was a very devastating knockout. I don't know if you got a chance to see Machida's eye afterwards, but it was really bad. The blood puffed up. It was swollen out. It was just a little slit that was open. And he was very woozy afterwards. I mean, he took a couple of big shots. It didn't look to me, Steve, when they were still on their feet and Shogun landed the overhand right. I didn't think, and that was right in front of me, I didn't think that landed all that flush, but he said that he noticed Machida's eyes roll from that. And then when they went to the ground, the first punch on the ground, it was a right hand from the top. And, I mean, that was a devastating blow. So Machida took a big beating and, very impressive performance by Shogun. I mean, I'm not surprised that he won. I picked Machida to win, but Shogun was obviously very close the last time. And anytime guys are of this caliber, you can't be surprised, when either one of them wins. But I was surprised with the dominant way he performed.
Well, I think the thing with Hua looking forward now is what do you defend against? Because obviously the leg kicks are ridiculous. His punching power can't be messed with because if you remember, the overhand right that looked like it bounced off of Machida's head is similar to what happened to Chuck Liddell that didn't look like a huge punch. So maybe Chuck wasn't that punch drunk in that fight, and maybe Hua's just got massive knockout power, right?
I mean, he's been known as a big puncher, and when you look at that division now, when you put Hua back to where he was, say, 4 or 5 years ago, wow. You really have some depth and some quality fights, and anticipate Anderson Silva moving into that division, in less than a year, and 205 is going to have some great fights for a long time. I mean, as each title changed hands, you kept saying, well, this is going to be the guy that's going to keep it for a while. Mm-hmm. When Rampage beat Chuck and Dan Henderson, you're thinking, hey, he's looking pretty good here. He loses it. Forrest maybe didn't have that same kind of cachet, although, Forrest had beaten Shogun, beats Rampage. All of a sudden you're saying, hey, is Forrest there? Machida, Joe Rogan said, hey, welcome to the Machida era. The Machida era lasted one controversial title defense, and then he gets knocked out. These guys at that division are really, really good, and I think the good thing about it is for us as fans, there are going to be some great matchups coming up in the future.
Well, and I think it's a lesson to people that, Silva and Fedor and GSP and maybe Aldo down the road, and BJ Penn, all deserve those accolades of pound for pound. But before you start firing a guy into the top 5 and calling it an era or saying he's unbeatable, Rashad Evans employed a horrible game plan against Machida, and Hua had it figured out. That's what I was impressed, I think, the most with Hua, is that he didn't stick with the same style, but that threat of the old style, just the leg kicks, you could see had Machida completely screwed up. He was guarding against the leg kicks, and Hua said, I'm not going to let him control the distance.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to go back to the first fight, Steve, and Hua did a magnificent job of watching the film. And remember Machida was talking about his defense, and there was all that talk to how elusive he was, and you couldn't catch him, and then he was adding the offense. But Hua did a great job of breaking down where he was vulnerable. It worked fairly well. We both thought that Hua won the first fight, but it was close. But we thought that the game plan worked. Well, what he did this time was he used that same game plan, but just added a feature onto it. And, I think that was magnificent on his part of being able to come up with plans that basically surprised Machida, yet were so effective. Machida maybe didn't anticipate him going the same direction, and he clearly paid for it. But I think, you're right in your earlier comment about, being careful about throwing guys in the top 5. But still, I think what it says is this sport, when you have guys that are of similar ability, there are so many ways to end a fight that you can never really say this guy's going to be dominant. That's what makes what Anderson has done, even with his craziness that he's done at 185 in the last couple fights, so impressive, is he's held it for so long and he hasn't really been challenged.
What do you think the plan is? Do you wait for the winner of Rampage and Rashad, put him in with Hua? Does Machida deserve another rematch? Because, they obviously had 2 fights. I mean, one went the distance, one was a quick knockout. Does he deserve a chance? Or do you change the plans on Silva and take him out of that 85 mix if he beats Sonnen and just move him right up?
Well, my initial reaction right after the fight was Silva would be the guy to make the fight with, because now that's going to be a tremendously exciting fight. 2 great strikers, 2 great Muay Thai fighters. That would be a very exciting fight. However, then you start thinking back, well, does Anderson Silva deserve that? Dana White's been on record saying that he wouldn't move Silva up and just immediately give him a title shot. He also was on record even before the fight saying, I'm unhappy with Anderson, and he needs to defend his middleweight title 2 more times before he moves up. So I think Anderson is out of the picture for the time being. I think we're going to see Anderson go against Chael Sonnen in August. If he's successful there, we'll see him go against Vitor Belfort sometime later in the year, October, November timeframe. And then I think, we would get a chance to see who would defend against Anderson Silva in 2011, assuming that Shogun still has the belt at that point.
And the last thing we should say, as a media guy, as a fan of the sport, it is good to see Hua look like he's all the way back. He was the big acquisition. I mean, he really was the guy when they got him when he was 26 years old.
Yeah.
And he's a good guy for the sport. His camp kind of gets it. Not that Machida isn't, but he's a guy who I think is going to do well for the title.
I agree. I mean, he's a classy guy. I had been critical of him after his fight with Forrest Griffin, his fight with Mark Coleman. In fact, he even said on the Quinton show, against Machida, he said, some guy asked me to give my bonus back for the fight of the night. Yep. And I mentioned at the post-fight press conference to him, I said, hey, there have been people critical of you, including me. And he smiled and laughed and says, I know. But he handled it very, very well. You got to give him a lot of credit for how classy he was. And it's good to see a guy that faced adversity, never complained, just worked hard and came back and put himself in a position to get back on top.